Andrew, no pronouns given, calling in from North Carolina, who is a theist who says that he can defend biblical slavery. Andrew, you are on the Atheist Experience with John and Forrest. How are you doing today?
What's up, guys? How's it going? I'm super excited. Thanks for letting me on.
I was having a great day until somebody said that they can defend slavery, and now I'm a little bit confused at how the rest of this day is going to go.
That's actually not what I was defending. What I was going to show is that biblical slavery is not what it's propped out to be. It's a lot different. People cherry pick
what is that?
things from the Bible, and honestly, I just wanted to have a conversation around that.
What's it
can you explain that?
Kind of like American slavery. It's actually propped out to be kind of like American slavery, which is way different.
Can we be a bit more scholarly about it? Can we be a bit more scholarly about it? Because the claim is that the biblical slavery is chattel slavery. Like, at least that's one of the forms of slavery in the Bible. So that's specifically what we're talking about. We're talking about chattel slavery. That would be people that are owned as property. So that would be the more accurate way to do it, instead of comparing it to American slavery, which obviously had different ways of implementing it, had different motivations and everything like that when compared to ancient Near Eastern slavery. So if we can be a little bit more accurate about what our claim is, that would be great to start off this conversation.
Well, respectfully, I was getting into it, but what I was getting at is that the American slavery, number one, kidnapped everybody. And under verse 16 in Exodus 21, that would have caused all of them to die.
Right. Okay. So just to cut this off real quick.
Immediately no.
So just to cut this off, I tried to correctly contextualize it in that it's chattel slavery that we're concerned with. You're trying to shift it into comparing it to American slavery and all this other stuff. Still, I don't think that you're going to have a good time there, because like the American slavery that was imposed, they bought slaves from people in Africa and everything like that, and then transported them to a different country, which would still be part of Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. You can buy and purchase slaves from the countries around you. Now, this is a little bit more, extrapolating what countries around you mean, because they weren't buying slaves from like Canada or Mexico. Those particular countries didn't exist at the time, obviously, but they were still buying from countries outside of the what was considered the United States at the time, or the colonies, or anything that you want to consider there. So if we want to be completely accurate about it, the man-stealing section that you're talking about there is very much related to like the actual stealing of fellow Israelites and the stealing of people in general. This was in the wider Near East considered to be a very bad thing, and it was outlawed and everything like that. So this is actually similar to other societies in the ancient Near East that had laws against this. But it definitely wasn't a condemnation of slavery in general. And also the slaves that were purchased from the nations around the Israelites, they were either prisoners of war or acquired in any number of ways. So you're really not helping yourself out here by trying to make this distinction. Well, sorry to overtake that, Forrest.
No, by all means, because I was going to say something very similar. I was going to bring up Leviticus 25 when it says, like, buy your slaves from the heathens around you and things like that. Like, what exactly do you think? Do you think these people were like selling themselves? How do you think they acquired these? Like, also the amount of times in the Bible where like they commit genocide, and then they, like we said at the beginning of the video, they keep all the virgin girls for themselves. I don't know if that's a stretch to say these people were kidnapped. So like, just the idea that you have to have this specific kind of kidnapping for it to be the kind of slavery that's bad, I don't understand. And I also don't understand why we're trying to differentiate this from American chattel slavery when, like, it is certainly chattel slavery. It doesn't matter if it falls completely into the American paradigm. There is no good slavery, period. So, like, if you're trying to draw a distinction and like, well, it's not this kind of slavery, and well, it's slavery, but they did it these ways, I don't understand what your rhetorical goals here are, and I'm pretty positive I don't like them. But I'll let you respond to what John said first, and then we'll get back to that.
Yeah, but before you respond, I do want to point out how what Forrest just mentioned is considered by scholars. Like you can look at Hector Avalos. He did an extensive write up on this kind of stuff. He classifies Numbers 31 as actually being sexual slavery, but you could also classify most marriages that occur in the Bible to be sexual slavery because the consent of the women are not considered. Only the consent of their fathers or husbands or whatnot are the ones that are considered. Women are not generally asked for their consent, and so that in any relationship where you are forced into the relationship and it's a sexual relationship is considered sexual slavery, and this is actually confirmed by multiple scholars in the field. I can look up the exact scholar if you want me to, but I have a reference that analyzed like Roman society as far as sexual slavery goes, and this definitely falls within that paradigm.
Most definitely. Anyway, Andrew, that was a lot. What do you think about it?
I actually got to take it one at a time because you threw a million things. I could have done this.
We agree. So first off is chattel slavery. Like the chattel slavery in the Bible is the exact same thing as the American chattel slavery as far as in classification. And so that's kind of where we're starting.
No, it's not. No, It's not. So first of all, if you injured a slave, you had to let them go. Deuteronomy 23, verse 15,
that's not true.
Even points out that if a slave runs away, if they run away, they can't be reclaimed. And yes, it is true.
What kind of slave is that?
Part of the Torah, which is a 5.
What kind of slave is that?
Okay, so do you want me to define slavery from biblically or American slavery? Because they're two different things.
Listen, the exact context that you're talking about here is in the Bible. So let's stick with the context that you provided. Mm-hmm. So in the Bible, you mentioned a portion where a slave runs away and they're supposed to not be given back to their person. So can you define what kind of slave they're talking about there?
Okay, again, so slavery in the Bible, that was not in God's ideal design.
It would be great if you would just answer John's question.
Okay, how about this? How about
you answer John's question?
Which was slavery.
No, how about you answer John's question?
One question. What was John's question? And make it one sentence.
Okay, so you weren't even listening. You don't even know what his question was.
What? Okay, so my question was, what kind of slave is in that passage that you quoted? That's my question.
Biblical slavery, but you're framing it differently.
No. Biblical slavery.
There's different types of slaves in the Bible. So just saying biblical slavery doesn't narrow it down. What type of slave is the one that you were talking about that can run away and not be recaptured?
Any slave. Any slave can do that.
No. That's not it. What's the verse again? Can you give me the verse?
Deuteronomy 23:15. If a slave runs away, they don't have to be reclaimed. So it doesn't. There's a incentive that if you injured a slave, number one, you had to let them go. Read further in Exodus 21, and then when you go to Deuteronomy 23, you'll see that a slave can actually get away from the master. There's a strong incentive to actually treat them well. In fact, in Leviticus specifically, let me pull out my notes. Leviticus 25:53 speaks that you cannot rule over them.
Well, so this is right. Not Deuteronomy 23:15 is specifically talking about Hebrew slaves, and Hebrew slaves were treated differently than chattel slaves or foreign slaves. So you need to come up with a better apologetic for this.
Like that is the biggest thing that I don't think you're catching here, is that the Bible gives very clear instructions for Hebrew slaves and non-Hebrew slaves. So if it is a Hebrew slave, they have to be let go after 7 years. There's rules about like if you knock out their eye or their tooth that you have to let them go. I'm pretty sure that one only applies to Hebrew slaves as well. There's rules that like after 7 years you let them go and then they're free of whatever debts or whatever like that. even then, there's also some caveats. For example, if this person came into slavery with a wife and child, then they get to keep the wife and child when they leave. But if they came in single, you can give that slave a wife and they can have children. And then even after they go free, their wife and children remain your slaves. And they, if they love their family, can declare, I love my family, I love my master. And you drive a spike through their ear into a door, and then they become your slave forever too. So even that has its own ridiculously fucked up caveats. But then there's also non-Hebrew slaves, which are property. They are passed down from parent to child. They're hereditary. They are property. They're items. They are to be the only rules. It talks about beating them, and like you can't beat them so hard that they die within 3 days or something like that. So like, if you're sitting here trying to say, well, it wasn't quite as awful as American slavery in these specific ways, sure. We can draw some lines there. But at the end of the day, what you are doing is ignoring what the Bible actually says about slavery, splitting hairs between different kinds of slavery to say which one's better, and defending the concept of slavery in literally any way ever, which is always a bad idea.
So first
Okay,
of all, you don't even
I do.
know.
Hold on. Can I clarify something real quick? So I'm reading the section here, and in it, I've got it pulled up right now. I'm reading the NRSVUE edition of it. And what this part is actually talking about, sorry, there is a distinction in Hebrew slaves and like foreign slaves and everything like that. But what this is actually doing is it's actually talking about sort of like an extradition treaty right here in the middle of Deuteronomy. So basically, it's in the preceding passage, you know, we got to take it into context. Everybody loves context. It's talking about the enemies that surround the camp, like the enemies of the Israelites, like the lands around the Israelites. And so then it goes into, and it says, you shall not return their owners' slaves who have escaped to you from their owners. So basically it's saying that slaves of other nations that escape into Israel, don't return them to their owners. So this is very specific to foreign slaves that are owned by people in foreign countries that escape into Israel. And so it is not a blatant rule about not returning slaves in general, like slaves that are owned by Israelites. It's very much about slaves that are owned by people that live outside of Israel.
So what passage are you looking at? 23? Because I'm looking at the same thing.
I'm looking at Deuteronomy 23, and then I start in 14 and read through to 15.
Okay.
I can just go ahead and read it for everybody. So in 14, it says, because the Lord your God, hold on, I'm reading it for people. Because the Lord your God travels along with your camp to save you and to hand over your enemies to you. Therefore, your camp must be holy so that he may not see anything indecent among you and turn away from you. You shall not return their owners' slaves who have escaped to you from their owners. So the there is talking about the enemies, when he says to save you and hand you over to your enemies up there, your camp must be holy. He's talking about their owners, meaning the enemies of God's people. Just like Captain America, I can do this all day.
So
I have other quotes I was going to read whenever we got there.
I'm not actually defending the idea of slavery. I believe that we live in an imperfect world. And what I'm saying is that this was the law of Moses, not God's law, but the law of Moses' attempt to manage.
Did God command these things?
Due to the hardness of their hearts.
Did God command? That's a great question. Yeah. Did God command slavery?
No, he actually never did. In fact, Jesus.
If you can turn in Leviticus 25:44 through 46, Seriously, if you could just real quick.
Read your Bible, dude. I've got it open right here. That was going to be my next question after you were done, John. Yeah, Leviticus 25:44. It clearly says, "You shall from the heathen that are around you, you shall buy them as men and women." Moreover, I hate the language in this fucking thing. It's a King James version. Let me read it off of this thing. "Your males and female slaves are to come from the nations around you, and from them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you, and members of their class born in your country. They will become your property. You can will them to your children as inherited property and make them slaves for life." That's Leviticus 25, and that is God speaking. God says, take slaves from the heathens among you and from the temporary residents of other countries living around you. They are your property to be passed down to your children. That's what God said.
And two things to that. Again, broken world needs God's peace. It is an imperfect.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
So God isn't all powerful. Like seriously,
Right.
if you read through the Old Testament, God perfectly describes how to encrust the Ark of the Covenant with gems and jewels. He tells them exactly like you could blueprint this shit out from the Old Testament, how to build a tabernacle, how to build a temple, exactly how to line the innards of the temple with gold and all this other stuff. He gives them painstaking. He says, don't eat shellfish. Right? Like he does all of these things in the Old Testament. Yeah, several fucking times. In the Old Testament, he says these things, but he can't say don't own another person as property. Like he can't put that in one of the 4 Ten Commandments of the second version of the 10 Commandments, of 3 versions of 10 Commandments, that he spends the first 4 mentally masturbating, like in the first 4. He can't make one of those. Don't own another person as a slave. That's really weird. Don't do that. It's bad. Like he can't do that, as well as some other commandments that I could give. But you're telling me, you're seriously sitting here arguing to me that he can mandate all of these things to right down to the amount of gems that encrust the Ark of the Covenant, but yet he can't tell his people not to own another person as property.
It's nutty, dude.
Again, I wasn't done telling you what I was going to tell you. And first of all, y'all are atheists. There's no foundation for your worldview. You acting like
Oh my God! Let's not pivot.
No, it's great.
Pivot.
Stay on topic. Don't try to jump to something else you're comfortable with. You're the one calling in, defending a God that said it's not only good, but how to own people. You're defending a God that told people how to keep slaves, where to get them, how to beat them. And you're going to pivot to some other dumb shit? No, we're going to talk about this. Why is it acceptable for you to worship a God that says slavery is good and tells how to do it?
The whole time. You're misrepresenting exactly what I believe. You're putting words into my mouth. You're acting like I hold positions that I don't.
Then let you explain it. Then explain it. Why are you defending slavery?
I'm not defending slavery. I never said that.
What are you defending?
I'm explaining what it was.
Okay, look.
What's the
what
point?
You said. Right. What you said was that God gave a law to a group of people whose hearts were hardened, meaning that he couldn't change their hearts, which means that he's not all powerful. But yet their hearts weren't hardened so much that they couldn't be told exactly how many crystals to put on the Ark of the Covenant. But yet their hearts were hardened just enough to be like, hey, don't own slaves. Like that's something that God couldn't do.
That's an issue.
Yeah, that's the part that we're confused on. We're confused as to your theology on why God is limited in this aspect. Why is God limited to, telling people how many crystals to put on the ark, but yet he can't tell them not to own another person as slave, as property? Sorry.
He actually. Hold on a second. Are you going to let me finish my point? Because you keep cutting me off when I'm in mid-sentence.
Are you going to make a point, or are you just going to pivot to some other bullshit argument?
Yeah.
Here's where I'll start then. In terms of owning people as slaves, they were actually told to treat them as if they were a hired hand. And first of all, I would like to point.
And immediately, Andrew, I have to interrupt you again. See, I want to let you speak. I really do. I want to let you finish what you're saying. But when you immediately open with shit like that, we have to cut in to point out what exactly, in what world do you treat a hired hand like property? In what world do you pass on a hired hand to your children as an item, as an object? When is that okay?
Let me address the heart and heart part. First of all, God does allow.
Nope, I would like you to answer my question first.
You're throwing a lot of different things for me to address, though. I got to do it one at a time.
I'm asking you this one question based on what you just said, and then I will let you continue. You started by saying that the Bible said that we should treat slaves like hired hands. I'm asking you, whenever would you treat a hired hand like the slaves of the Bible, beating them, passing them on to your children as property? When is that acceptable?
There's an incentive. First of all, again, you're making certain claims that are not validified, because if you go down further in Exodus, if you do injure a slave, there's a strong incentive not to hurt your slave.
I'm going to ask you again. In Leviticus, God himself says where to get slaves, how to beat slaves, and that you can pass them down to your children as property. You made the claim that the Bible also says that slaves should be treated like hired help. I'm asking you to square that circle. When do you beat hired help? When do you pass hired help down as property? Then you can move on to your next dumb talking point.
Guys, you have to use the Bible collectively. It's not a dictionary. It's a story.
I'm not asking you about that. I'm asking you, is there ever a time when you can pass a hired hand down to your children as property? Is there ever a time?
In those days, I think you could if you married into it and you wanted to stick with your master.
Okay, well then we have a vastly different understanding of what hired help are for and how they are to be treated. Move on to your next thing now. We'll come back to it.
Okay, so and thank you for letting me talk a little longer. I appreciate it. The hardness of the heart's part. With free will, you can't just force people to do things. So over time, God.
And immediately we have another problem. Andrew, in the book of Exodus, the Pharaoh wants to let the Hebrew slaves go. Over and over, he expresses that he wants to let them go. And God hardens his heart so that he will not let them go. It's one of the many examples of when God violates people's free will in the Bible in order to serve his own purposes. God wants to do a bunch of plagues. God wants to kill a bunch of babies. So God hardens the Pharaoh's heart over and over and makes him keep the slaves against his own will. So God is clearly willing to violate free will. Why doesn't he do it here?
So in terms of Pharaoh's hardness of heart, Pharaoh already made his decision a long time ago. God was honestly just
no. I'm sorry. No. Nope. It specifically says in Exodus, and I can read it out loud here. I can definitely.
I was pulling it up as yeah.
Yeah. It definitely says that God hardened his heart, as if God actively did something to prevent Pharaoh from releasing the Hebrew Israelites, from their bondage. A bondage, by the way, that they entered into like willingly and everything. But in any case, God in the Bible, it definitely says that God directly does something to the Pharaoh in order to harden his heart. I think that it's because God really wanted to kill all the firstborn sons of Egypt. Like he really had a big thing for like killing children at that point for whatever reason. And so he was like, I'm going to kill all of them. So I'm going to create a situation to where I can do that because Pharaoh is not going to let my people go and everything like that. So basically, God orchestrates this entire situation so that he can kill a bunch of children. But it all starts with hardening Pharaoh's heart. It directly says that he does that.
It's like over and over. I've got just the first one I opened to was here in Exodus 10, verse 20. It's talking about, it says, but God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would not let the children of Israel go. And that's not the first, second, or third time it uses that exact language. Here it's number is in chapter 7, a couple of chapters back. God says, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders against the land of Egypt." He literally says he's going to do it, and then he does it.
Evidence is a fucking bitch, isn't it?
Pharaoh's position and where he wanted to stand was already solidified. God simply just let his heart actually made it harder because he wanted to get back at Egypt. Essentially, all the plagues actually could draw back, I believe, to the different gods of Egypt, and it was honestly to shame Pharaoh where he was at.
So just to be clear, from what you're saying here, God already knew that the Pharaoh wasn't going to let the children go because his heart was already hardened. So him hardening his heart over and over again throughout the story is irrelevant. It doesn't matter that he continued to harden his heart because his heart was already hard. However the fuck, that's just atherosclerosis, but whatever. Like, the point is, the end goal here was to torment a bunch of innocent people in order to shame their king. That's God's plan. Because the people of Egypt that suffered from the plagues and then had their children killed, they didn't make the policy. They didn't have the rule of law. They didn't make the laws. They didn't do any of that. They were just people. So God so desperately wanted to embarrass one dude that he tortured thousands of innocent people and killed thousands of innocent children and violated a man's free will just so he could do that. And that's why slavery's good.
He didn't violate free will, though. That's not correct. But in terms of that word innocent, you can't just hand that around. No one's innocent, not even me. We all need redemption, first of all. And Egypt back then is not Western society. So you're attaching assumptions to this that don't apply to the time period.
Does that
make sense?
What? No, it doesn't. We're talking about killing the firstborn children of every family. What did those babies do to deserve to die because their Pharaoh did some stuff?
They killed the firstborns of the Israelites. And so, like I was saying, God was redeeming his people. So the babies, the firstborn
Egyptian babies, they were the ones that killed all the Israelites?
Not the babies specifically, but Egypt themselves. And
okay. So let me propose this.
The Egyptians did some bad things, so the babies of the Egyptians are the ones that need to be killed.
So not all of them would have been babies.
And therefore, and again, just to remind everybody what we're talking about here, and therefore these babies died, and so therefore biblical slavery is okay.
So let me get this straight. You would have no problem with if the United States or any other country had a problem with another country and they went in and they actively killed all of the firstborn children, non-combatants, by the way, which is a war crime. Right. Mm-hmm. All the firstborn children, they killed all the firstborn children just because of what some assholes in the government did. Would you say that is justified, or is this another special pleading argument?
Well, I wouldn't say that in that particular example, but after all,
it's special pleading.
God who can do whatever he wants, who decides how the universe runs.
Okay. Special pleading.
There it is.
Certainly can.
It took us a long time to get there, Andrew, but we finally got to you being honest. God can do whatever he wants. He runs the universe. So it doesn't matter. This 27 minutes into this conversation, we finally get there. It doesn't matter about slavery. It doesn't matter what we say. It doesn't matter what we point to in the Bible, because in your arguments, trying to defend the Bible by saying, well, you can't just read one passage. You have to read the whole thing. You have to read this passage. It doesn't fucking matter. Like, at least now you're finally honest. You are okay with the Bible slavery stuff because God said it and God can do whatever he wants. Period. It doesn't matter what the Bible actually says. Doesn't matter what slavery actually is. Doesn't matter who's suffering when. Doesn't matter how many babies are dying. God did a thing, and that's fine because God did the thing. And I don't care because God did it, and God's allowed to do whatever. That's your actual argument. That's your answer.
No, hold on a second. You've been dishonest, and you've been framing my arguments on what I believe. I'm not a fan of slavery. and neither would God ultimately. He's trying to recover the world.
If God's not a fan of slavery, ultimately, why would he ever utter anything? Okay, so you're not a fan of slavery. Let's say that you're king of whatever fucking country. Would you ever tell your people, hey, you can go and purchase slaves from the nations around you? You can purchase them. You can pass them down as property within your own family. Would you ever, as a person, go and tell a group of people that they can do that?
No, first of all, we have credit.
Right. That means that you're more moral than your own God.
The same thing as
the God that you believe in, the God that you get on your knees for every single Sunday. You are better than that sick, sadistic motherfucker.
Hold on 1 second. You're not letting me finish.
You're not listening to me.
And the time and just shortening it down to one time period. I'm talking about a progressive recovery of humanity.
So God is constrained by time? Is God constrained by time?
Hold on. No, he's not constrained by time, but what I'm saying is...
Okay, then it shouldn't fucking matter. It should not fucking matter in the least bit whether or not he's speaking to the Israelites in the 2nd century BCE or if he's talking to us now. It should not matter if he's not constrained by time. His absolute moral foundation should apply all throughout history, but it fucking doesn't. And you know why? That's because God was created by men to push man's own agenda using some supernatural dickhead in order to push it. That's it.
Well, you guys are not letting me finish again. Because I was actually about to say...
Because you keep saying dumb shit every single sentence you utter. That's why.
You do too, though. you talk about God.
What have I said? Forrest, what have I said? What have I said that's been dumb so far?
I want to ask Andrew, like, what have we said that's been wrong? We've quoted the Bible to you, and we've talked about what God actually said. And all you have done this whole call is justify evil. And saying, well, it's not really that, and it's not really that, and it's not really this, and you have to take it this way and that way. When at the end of the day, the point, our thesis statement here at the ACA is that there is no good slavery. Slavery is wrong all the time, and all the time slavery is wrong. And you're sitting here saying, well, God couldn't have told them not to own slaves because it was the times and the this and the that. Meanwhile, God can give clear instructions on how to cut your hair, on how to trim your beard, on what fabrics to wear, on what food to eat, on what animals to touch, on who to have sex with. He can give all of these very clear instructions, structuring society in the way that he wants. And then not only does he fail to say, don't own human beings as property, he tells them how and says, go do it. And you're saying that this is just what he has to do. Tell me how we're missing something here.
Well, first of all, you're an atheist, so to call something evil, I mean, you have no foundation for it.
Just be honest and address the question.
Where do you want to take?
Just address the question, Andrew.
Oh, you're borrowing from my foundation. First of all,
don't pivot to something else. Quit being a coward and own up to what your book says. Which is worse, Andrew? Eating shellfish or owning slaves? Which is worse?
So I don't know what you mean by coward, but second of all, to actually answer your question, he did give clear instructions. The law's never changed. In fact, Jesus particularly fulfilled the law through the 10 Commandments, which had nothing to do with slavery.
Andrew, I'm going to have to interrupt you again because you are continuing to pivot to something else rather than addressing the actual point. Which is worse, wearing clothing of mixed fabrics or owning slaves? Which is worse?
Hold on. Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Which is worse, wearing clothing of mixed fabrics or owning slaves? Which of those two things is a worse thing to do?
So the problem with that question, though, is that slavery,
I dare you to just answer a direct question. Which is worse, owning a human being as property or wearing a nylon rayon blend?
Again, there's a fundamental problem with your question, though.
I'm going to ask you a different question then. I'm going to ask you a different question then. Which is worse, cutting the sides of your beard or owning slaves? Which is worse, Andrew?
Again, you're framing the question wrong. Slavery in the Bible.
Oh my God. Hold on. Let me try.
Yeah,
Which is worse, eating shrimp or owning a person as property? Which one is worse?
Wait, did you say getting shrimp? What?
I said shrimp. Eating shrimp.
Eating shrimp. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I heard that wrong. Again, I'm not for slavery, so I would obviously say that.
No one is saying you're for slavery, Andrew. No one is saying you're for slavery. What I'm saying is that you're behaving cowardly and that you can't answer a direct question that contradicts your worldview. Which is worse, I'm not, owning slaves or eating shrimp?
I would say having to own a slave would be worse, of course. But again, you're framing.
So ignoring the bullshit way you worded that, then why is it that God found the time to tell people not to eat shrimp, but not use human beings as farming equipment? Why was it a bigger priority for your God to condemn eating shrimp than it was for him to not tell people how to own slaves? Because again, he didn't just fail to condemn it, he directly condoned it.
No, it's managed. It's managed debt. It's managed debt.
Do you think?
Some people sold.
Do you think, Andrew?
Dude, let me finish, dude.
Andrew, you called into our show and you're saying evil, horrible shit, and I'm just trying to get you to be honest for one fucking second and just answer a direct question. I'll show you. I'll demonstrate for you. Okay, I'll show you what we want so there's no confusion. Hey, John, which one is worse? Is it owning slaves or is it touching the skin of a dead pig?
Definitely owning slaves. Don't even have to think about it.
If you were to tell somebody what not to do and you only had the chance to tell them one thing, would you rather tell them to not own slaves or would you rather tell them to not touch the skin of a dead pig?
Definitely tell them to not own slaves.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Is there ever any situation ever where owning slaves is in any way even remotely acceptable?
Not at all.
Okay, if there was slavery in your society, John, and you were in charge of it, would you rather manage it or abolish it?
I would definitely say, hey, we shouldn't be fucking doing this. Let's stop.
Yeah, you would. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And last question: if you were like actually in control of everything, and you knew slavery was a possibility, do you think that it would be justifiable for you to then like tell people to do slavery? Do you think that telling people do slavery might confuse them in some way? Is that something you'd ever want in any world?
I would never command anybody to own another person as property.
Definitely. See how easy that is, Andrew? Slavery is worse than eating shellfish, and slavery is worse than touching the skin of a dead pig, and slavery is worse than cutting the size of your beard. Slavery is bad, and your God didn't just not say that slavery is bad. God said, here's how to do slavery. And you're sitting here saying, well, he was managing it. He could have abolished it. He could have just said, don't own slaves. He had 10 commandments. Like John pointed to a little while earlier, like a bunch of them were just jacking himself off. He could have made one of those commandments, don't own slaves, but he didn't. In fact, he did the opposite and said, I command you to take slaves this way. Your God is a monster. It's a good thing he doesn't exist.
So let me ask you this, though. Why did they sell themselves into slavery? Because that's actually...
And now we've gotten into the bullshit,
it was more
right nonsense. You're going to have to actually answer a question someday in your life, Andrew, and I hope it's an easier one than this, because frankly, it's sad that you can keep running up into this really, it shouldn't be a moral conundrum. They should be a very easy one for you. Slavery's bad. Yeah, the Bible says some shit about slavery. it must have meant something different. There must be some other thing that this is a mistranslation. This is a misinterpretation. God would never do this. You can't even be that level of dishonest. You have to go all the way down to the fucking dregs and say, no. This was the way God had to do it. God was good. God did it this way on purpose because God can do whatever he wants. You should be ashamed of what you've been defending here, Andrew.
You're dishonest with my positions, but I understand you probably need another caller. I appreciate you letting me come on.
Let me ask you one more question, Andrew. Let's see if you can fucking answer it. Does anything God ever do ever bad?
If he's the rule maker, then whatever rule he makes is his rule.
That's not the correct answer.
So is everything that God commands good? Because he's the rule maker?
It is good according to his purposes, but just like that previous caller, I might not understand everything, but yes, his rules are his rules, not yours or mine.
Do you trust God? Do you trust God to be good even if you don't understand it?
Well, he healed me when I had a stomach issue. The doctors couldn't understand how I was healed.
Would love it if you could just answer a question. You do trust him. Great. So then, because everything God is good, because everything God commands is good, and you trust it to be good, even if you don't understand it, you trust that God's command is good. God commanded slavery. So therefore, yes, you have been defending slavery. You have been justifying it this whole time. Despite your constant protestations, we have not been taking you out of context. We have not been putting words in your mouth. We have not been misrepresenting your point. You called here to defend slavery and to defend the God that commanded it. That is evil, Andrew, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And with that, we will now move on to another call.